Hello, Mrs. O. So, AI. You and I both know what it is, right? For most of this, I'm gonna zoom into the art aspect of it, but that's just like the majority of it. I'm not gonna disregard everything else.
Wey. Mi gente, oigan bien. Lingan guli 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 guacha, lingan gu, lingan gu, lingan guli 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 guacha, lingan guli guli guli.
See, so that was pretty funny, right? I mean, maybe not to you, but still. But if you think about it for maybe like 3 seconds, you realize, oh, I can do this to anyone. I can make AI make anyone do anything. So now for the politics of it. As a whole, the right seems far more in favor of it, or at least more tolerant of it than the left, as President Trump himself often posts or reposts or otherwise promotes AI images and videos that paint himself or his policies in a favorable or heroic way. While from what I've seen and deduced, much of the left wing is against generative AI, as it is an affront to personal expression due to being unable to have any kind of personal identity. Um, but in my own experience, I've seen AI used by people who I can only assume to be left wingers, although this point would likely fall under social media instead, in the form of Kirkification. So, Charlie Kirk was a right wing debater, and following his assassination in early September, the internet was heavily flooded with AI images of Kirk's face superimposed onto various figures, often for comedic use, like some of the ones that I have here for you. Is that Beethoven? I think so, yeah. So, even more notorious is the alleged but most likely, almost definitely, AI song known as We Are Charlie Kirk. I'm sorry. This is so ridiculous.
He lived for Jesus, unafraid to die. We are Charlie Kirk, we carry the flame. We'll fight for the gospel, we'll honor his name. We are Charlie Kirk, his courage our own.
Sorry. So, released just 5 days after his assassination, the song was heavily used in comedic contexts among younger or more aware users of social media, yet some clips show the song reaching its target audience, quote unquote, in older people who likely agreed with Kirk's beliefs, like this.
We are Charlie Kirk.
Oh my God!
We are Charlie Kirk.
Oh God. Who's the singer?
Wait, is this authentic or making this fun?
So clearly, as seen with Donald Trump's usage, he seems to be in favor of it. And while there is a lack of any usage of AI by left-wing politicians I have seen, I can only assume that those leaning away from the right wing would mock someone's death within barely even a week. I deduce this because, as I said, Charlie Kirk was right-wing himself, so I don't think that the guys on his team would be doing this. Anyways, so to back this claim up, according to a National Library of Medicine study titled Political Ideology Shapes Support for the Use of AI in Policymaking, I don't really know what that has to do with medicine, but whatever. So the study says that center leftists reported more negative attitudes and feelings toward the government using AI. Although, according to the Washington Post, the White House is in the process of adding regulations to AI models, requesting full access to them 90 days before public release to assess any dangerous capabilities or weaknesses that could be exploited by hackers or foreign governments. Although, if I'm correct, Trump himself is delaying that. However, even still, this is more of a regulation in order to ensure that AIs are safe to use for the government, not a concern about artistic principles or environmental impacts that you'd see from more left-leaning sources like UCLA Classroom, which they didn't really use any evidence, they just kind of said things, but I did look into something from MIT News, and the environmental impacts are studied there. Since their sources like Associated Press seem largely impartial, who would have guessed the centrists don't have an opinion? They primarily report on other people's opinions on it from what I can deduce. And on social media, no one post or video or influencer can be used since realistically, everyone has opinions on it that differ and ultimately align with the political party, which would be redundant. And so on social media, generative AI is often used to create photos or videos or otherwise alter them for entertainment or deceptive purposes. And so AI can also be used to generate scripts for some people, often people who just talk, often trying to make a point or illustrate an idea. In my experiences, I see a lot of AI generated captions, like some famous ones are Japan is turning footsteps into electricity, or Singapore is turning rainwater into drinkable water. There's also a quote unquote band that's prevalent on Instagram, typically on memes catering to people who like gothic women. But the band is AI generated and is well known enough to be AI generated to have GIFs dedicated to making fun of any video using a song by them. I've seen influencers argue against AI, but not as often as I see AI. But I sincerely doubt that it's as heavily politicized on social media as it is in the other ways I've discussed. I think that to many people on the internet, AI is just a thing you'll see every now and again and have to be wary of in case of misinformation. Those who care tend to be left winged and against it, and those who don't could fall anywhere on the political spectrum. They just don't really care, as displayed by this gift that's often used. And so, for a local source, I choose myself. As an executive member of the film club at Troy High and a movie snob, as well as a chronic music listener to an unhealthy degree, like I sleep with my AirPods in, Mrs. I take this serious. And also, someone with aspirations to work with film, I find the use of AI to create art disgusting. This part is probably just going to sound like a rant, so I apologize, but even disregarding environmental impacts or benefits it could have, AI quote unquote art is the antithesis of art, yet conversely is a summation of all the art it's been fed and trained on. It's like a Frankenstein of every artist's work seen only at a surface level view. It takes away any individualism. It's like a sort of uncanny valley feeling you get when presented with the perfect average of humans. I like to call this guy here John Human. I think it's funny. But anyways, quite frankly, it's just disgusting, and half the time it doesn't even look or sound good. The issue is, and I actually stumbled onto this thought while talking with Carl, like around the time that you assigned this, is that there's now tiers of art. This may be a bad example, but think of it like this. So, food used to have to be handmade for subsistence rather than selling, so it was made with quality. And as the focus became less on serving oneself and more on others, it slowly shifted more towards quantity in order to make more money. Then things became industrialized and mass-produced and are made with chemicals and such, and real food is something that's less accessible than the quote-unquote slop. And so now there's a bottom tier of food, cheap and accessible yet barely considered food, a middle tier of good food but still somehow questionable. I assume that's what would fit into a middle tier, maybe not, I'm not sure. I haven't really put too much thought into a middle tier. And then the top tier is like gourmet stuff that you'd see rich pricks eating, like Gordon Ramsay. Now that art can be mass-produced without a human element, there will be tiers to it, and only those with access and resources to access it can indulge in real human art, whether it be music or paintings or anything. It's dystopian, quite frankly. Quite frankly, folks. Sorry. Now comes the time to evaluate the reliability of my primary and secondary sources for any misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, all of which are synonymous, so I don't really get the point of having them be separate words, but that just may be my opinion presented as fact. Was that slick how I just shoved a bunch of the terms into there? If that doesn't quite fit the criteria, just let me know and I'll make a legitimate chart for this, including the vocabulary terms, rather than it just being more talking and kind of wiggling the terms into there. Anyways, first source is the right-wing media, largely coming from Trump and Washington Post, which, by writing with the administration in mind, aligns with the right wing. So these three writers, Kat Zakrzewski, Ian Duncan, and Ellen Nakashima, were the three editors for the Washington Post article regarding AI, and obviously the author from my other source of Donald Trump's own usage is the president himself. The intended audience for Trump's images are his supporters due to often painting him in an absurdly heroic way, which, not to get political, but that has to be how they actually view him, because there's no way they don't. And the intended audience for the Washington Post would be anyone who would be interested in the current administration's stance on AI, or just being up to date on what the government is doing in general. Politically educated could be a good blanket term, but maybe not, I'm not entirely sure. For any bias, obviously Trump is right-wing, but the Washington Post, I can only assume, wouldn't have bias, but rather align with whatever the current administration may be. Reliability-wise, I'd say that Trump is not reliable, and he isn't even really a source, and would obviously only argue in his own favor if he were. The Washington Post presented the White House policy on AI plainly, and rather than focusing on the fact that Trump chose to delay it, they presented the facts of the article very clearly. While there may be negatives that weren't mentioned, which would be omission, or I missed in my reading, which would be dumb, the article seems very reliable and trustworthy. So the authors of the UCLA Classroom article, those being Ramesh Srinivasan, as well as Emily Jacoby, they seem qualified enough. These are their credentials right here. But one could argue that Emily, being part of an environmental nonprofit, could be biased, as obviously someone concerned with the environment wouldn't approve of something that harms the environment, like AI. This article itself doesn't have any linked evidence for its claims besides studies show, but I did find that MIT News does affirm said claims like I said earlier. The intended audience is clearly those who agree with the points presented in the article, as the last section is what we can do, as in we, you and me, not French for yes or the 2007 Nintendo console. Neither of those things, but WE, you and me, misso. What can we do? Sorry. Clearly, left-leaning by its association with environmentalism, which I know it isn't exclusively a left-wing thing to be environmentalist, but it's very heavily left-wing. For the center source, I didn't look at any one article because it really only presented about it in a non-political way, so there isn't an author. Intended audience could be anyone, but to be specific, I'd say someone who's trying to understand the general population's opinion on AI, or how AI is used without seeing anything political about it. I can't cite any evidence because there weren't claims made, and the bias is in and of itself a lack of bias, which leads the readers to view it through their own political lens and bias. I'd say it's reliable because the bias, it kind of isn't really a bias. It just shows the facts of things without the politics, though that may be an issue in other cases, say a more politicized issue. Without the politics of something could be heavily misinterpreted by a reader. But for AI, I'd say if they really cared, they'd know the politics of it. So by targeting those who don't care for the politics of it, they also target those that don't care that much. As for social media, nothing can be evaluated properly. There is no one author, no claim made except for indifference or favor by using it, no evidence, etc. By default, I'd say it's unreliable. I myself am incredibly biased. I'm very aware of that. I haven't looked into the quote-unquote economic benefits of AI or whatever else may be used in favor of AI, because I don't really care about AI as a whole. I only care about AI that is used to deepfake, create music or art, create stories, or anything else, because the whole point of art is to be a person's soul spilt into their medium, and AI has no soul. I have no evidence but the ones that I've compiled, and I would say that I'm incredibly unreliable. So now, for analysis, the right and left-wing sources seem directly opposed, yet both similar in their omission. Donald Trump himself presents AI in a way that doesn't even present AI really. He uses it and loves it clearly, and the UCLA Classroom is very obvious in its dislike for AI. Both target motions very heavily. Trump targets idolization and admiration, while UCLA targets care for the environment. Information emphasized for Trump's side is that AI can create these images, and the information for UCLA is the environmental impact. Information that may be counterproductive to either side's view of AI is heavily omitted, and both sides clearly intend to sway viewers to their side of the argument. Centrist and social media sources frame the topic as something that isn't really political, centrists only presenting information, and social media only presenting humor. Centrists target logic, while social media targets, funny haha jokes. And centrists emphasize any relevant information to whatever instance of AI they're discussing, while social media uses no information. Centrists give viewers the information that could possibly allow them to form their own opinion, and social media presents nothing to form an opinion besides funny. It's comparing books to branded circuses. And lastly, myself, I present the issue in an artistic framework, only being concerned with that aspect of it. I use a heavily critical tone. I target admiration for art, emphasize that, and omit any other aspect of it. I would sway viewers of artistic persuasions to think just like me. This may kind of suck, misso, but I kind of overestimated how easy this could be, so I apologize in advance. I hope I get a good grade.